Welcome to Publishing Best Practices, our content marketing webinar. From SilverTech, we are a digital marketing agency working to redefine how businesses engage with and understand their customers. I'm your host, Ian Hughes, content strategist here at SilverTech, write for SilverTech blog, podcast, and our webinars. I'm joined by Samantha Maltis, SilverTech's principal strategist, marketing manager, and content marketing expert. Welcome, Sam.
Hi, Ian. So this is the second in our series of Lead to Loyal inbound summer school webinars, so what is Lead to Loyal? It's creating valuable digital experiences at each and every point from the first interaction through repeat business. By understanding each individual customer interaction, Lead to Loyal allows businesses to navigate and optimize the customer experience better than ever before.
It's about building loyalty through the tactics and strategies here, your SEO, SEM, web and mobile, content marketing, email marketing, social media marketing, each of which we'll be covering at some point in our Inbound Summer School webinar series. So today, the agenda looks like this. We're going to cover before you publish, the content marketing strategy and calendar. Then we'll get into content lifecycle and the approval process. Then we'll cross over into the publishing phase and cover publishing best practices for web pages and blog posts, then for email, social posts, and then video. Before you publish, content marketing strategy and calendar. So a content marketer's challenges, they're twofold. First, they must conceive of and write great content. Then they must publish content in a way that ensures it reaches not only its intended audience, but is flexible enough to be shared and amplified beyond its initial publication. So we covered several best practices, from generating new ideas to how to structure content in our first webinar of this series, How to Write Great Content. Today we address the second challenge. So the goal of a content marketer is to publish content that inspires action. I think the inspiration comes in your writing, and the action has to do with the publishing. Today we will cover publishing best practices from strategy to formatting that will ensure that your content leads to the next steps. Key insight here, content marketing costs 62% less than outbound marketing. It generates more than 3 times as many leads.
So if you're with us today, then it's likely that you already believe in content marketing and understand that it's important to have a content marketing strategy. Perhaps the better question is, why do I need to document my content marketing strategy?
Well, the answer to that question, Sam, is those with a documented content marketing strategy, according to the latest research from Content Marketing Institute, are far less challenged with every aspect of content marketing, generally more likely to consider themselves effective with every tactic and social media channel, and are able to justify a higher percentage of the marketing budget to be spent on content marketing.
That makes a lot of sense.
Documented content marketing strategy helps you drive strategic, proactive, short-term, and long-term content plans. It creates ways for you to communicate with your customers through both digital and traditional channels, leveraging competitive standards, industry best practices, and your unique customer needs.
The more people within your organization that understand the why behind your content creation, the better. Couldn't say this enough. The most effective content marketing programs utilize content from many different voices within your organization's walls. If you want blog contributions from your leadership team or your sales team, or another group that might be a thought leader, the best way to do that is to share with them the reasons why you need their creative input. Gaining buy-in at the content marketing strategy stage also expedites the approval process, but more on that in a little bit.
So moving on to the content lifecycle and, as Sam mentioned, the approval process. After you've documented your content strategy, it's time to start scheduling. Joe Paluzzi of the Content Marketing Institute suggests that every editorial calendar needs to include the following: a prioritized list of what you're publishing based on the content strategy you've developed, assign content producers and or editors who will be responsible for the content, channels the content will be delivered through, metadata, i.e. tags that can be used to track the types of topics of the content that you're creating, and targeted publishing dates, as well as a timetable to make sure your content meets its deadlines for every phase of the creation and production process. Sam, any calendar best practices that you can share? Is there a template or tool that you prefer or recommend here?
That's a really great question. And so this is going to sound like a non-answer, but it's really not. The best thing that you can do is whatever is going to work for your organization. So if there's a lot of workflow or approval process that you need to be able to get your content to the point where you can publish, it might be better to purchase a tool that actually has those workflows built in. So I know healthcare, financial services, a lot of the folks who are on this webinar listening today, there's some compliance components covenants to what you need to do, or HIPAA regulations that you need to make sure you follow. So you may want to have something that actually has those workflows built in so that you can be a little bit more efficient. But the biggest thing to remember is that you're all working off of one piece of, or one source of truth. So that can be as simple as a Excel sheet. It really can be. As long as you have the information that's up here on the screen, so who it's assigned to, what information you're doing, where you're going to publish it, and what the timeline is, I think that's really what's going to make you successful. The biggest thing is actually writing it down. A lot of times it's not really something that's everyone sticks to, and once you hit that step, then you can maybe refine it a little more into something more sophisticated.
Exactly. We now have our strategy in place, an editorial calendar. It's helpful to look at the content lifecycle. In web content management systems, features and best practices, Dean Parker describes the lifecycle as such: create, edit and collaborate, submit and approve, publish, archive, delete. Though there are many different definitions of the content lifecycle across the industry and even within organizations, I'd say a content manager might define the lifecycle differently than a content marketer. I find Barker's description helpful for several reasons. First being that content marketing is a team effort. At every organization, someone needs to create the content and someone else needs to approve that content. I think the only exception is the single owner-operator blogging on behalf of their organization, but I suggest this lifecycle is still helpful because it just lays it out that there are several steps for the content production lifecycle and creation. Sam, often the approval process is where content publication stalls. I myself have worked at an organization where a blog post had to be approved by 5 different leaders from 5 different areas of the organization. Any best practices you can share here?
So you had 5, not 25, right? Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm sure it could go that high.
I'm sure it probably could in some organizations. I think, so that's not an uncommon thing that we hear about, especially, again, as I mentioned, compliance. It's sometimes a necessary thing to be able to make sure that you maintain your business standards, right? So again, I think having a documented content strategy, making sure that you talk about workflows and put SLAs in place. Sometimes there may be a need for even an expedited SLA. So normal course of business within 24 hours, if that works for your organization without being too limiting, that's fine. But there may be some very quick things that you need to get up, and being able to tag those things as this is a hot item or this is a red item, your SLA goes down to a couple hours.
Right.
I think that will help too. But as long as everyone knows that and you set that expectation from the beginning of when you start this process and everyone's bought into that idea, everyone agrees on it, it makes it a lot easier. But 5 is a lot. In an ideal world, it would be 1 or 2, but sometimes that just is what it needs to be.
In many cases, Barker himself in the book notes that he found, though people are setting up these complicated workflows, it comes down to, in the end, the most effective are the ones that are 95% of content approvals are simple serial workflows, and 95% of those have a single step. An editor submits content to be published, and an approver publishes it. And I think it comes back to that documented content strategy. I think if you have buy-in to that documented content strategy, the actual individual blog posts that you'll be publishing throughout the year, it'll be easier to get that approval because you'll be working from that larger document that you've already all bought into.
Very true.
On to the publishing stage. We're going to cover some best practices for web pages and blog posts in this section. There are many tools for a content marketer to use when publishing a web page or a blog post, and I think it's beyond our scope today to go into the details and semantics particular to each platform. So we're going to remain a little platform agnostic here and offer best practices to publishing clean and agile web pages. But first, let's differentiate between web pages and blog posts.
Right. So a web page is a form of unidirectional content, meaning, as the name suggests, that web content is pushed out in one direction. And this is really important to note as you're putting these thoughts together. Blog content, on the other hand, is bidirectional. The audience of your blog content can comment, share, engage, and in doing so create user-generated content, or UGC, as we know here. For your blog to be bidirectional, it must be developed with UGC in mind. A web page without this functionality is not an appropriate substitute. If your CMS does not have a blogging template, then consider blogging on a platform that does. There's lots of them out there.
And that brings us to the age-old question: how often should I update my website and blog? Ultimately, the frequency at which you update your web content should be dictated by your business needs. There are, however, advantages to updating your content on a regular basis. Search engines favor new content, and your returning website visitors will see that your organization is active, engaged. Use website analytics tools like Google Analytics to determine which pages are performing and which ones are underperforming. Update the underperforming pages first, then refine every 6 months or so.
So blogging is a different matter though. As we mentioned earlier, your blog is a form of bi-directional content. It allows for engagement, sharing, and of course, conversion. Your blog is the heart of your content marketing and should have a consistent heartbeat to ensure that your efforts remain strong across all channels.
So this is from our partners at HubSpot, their insights into blogging frequency. I'm sure you may have seen these. Quite intimidating. You can see that traffic begins to noticeably trend upwards after 5 to 10 monthly posts. Sam, thoughts here? I think we've seen clients that have had success publishing less frequently than what HubSpot says here.
Yeah, this is intimidating to say the least. When I first saw this, I was like, 16? What does that even equal a week? That's 4 a week. That's crazy. But I mean, that's probably what those marketing teams are doing. So that's all they're doing for blog posts and the inbound traffic stuff. So I would say a couple things on this. Number one is keep in mind your audience. There are some particular organizations that this will flat out just not work for. There are some that it won't. So keep in mind your audience, where they are, going back to your personas and talking to them where they are. That's an important piece. The other piece is that if you're doing something, you're increasing, right? So never be intimidated by the fact that 16 plus, I don't even know, 16 plus scares me a little bit too. I mean, how much more does that go up before it actually starts to plateau? But 5 to 10 a month that's a good number of blog posts, especially for a small, medium-sized business. That's almost too much. So it depends on where you're at. And we don't have any statistics from HubSpot. I mean, the source is here, but in terms of the size of these businesses either. So try and keep that in mind too as we go through this.
Yeah, I think you'll find your organization may see a similar curve. It's just those bottom numbers may be different. It's just about increasing that production.
Exactly.
More from HubSpot here. Here you can see that companies, once they cross the 400 post threshold for posts, that is the total number of posts that they've on their sites, there is a noticeable difference in leads generated. I think, again, same point as before. It's probably unique to your organization, but the more you can get out there creating content, publishing good content, the better. Key takeaway, this sums it up nicely. Overall, companies that make a commitment to regularly publish quality content to their blog tend to reap the biggest rewards in terms of website traffic and leads, and those results continue to pay out over time. We've talked about strategy, calendars, approvals, and frequency. Now I want to talk, this is kind of my favorite topic here, a little secret for marketers to be able to publish clean, actionable content. And we're going to go through just quickly here, but you'll have the slides if you want to go back and review. HTML for content marketers. If you've ever published content to your website or blog and noticed irregular fonts, strange page breaks, broken links that didn't appear in the what you see is what you get, your WYSIWYG editor. Here's a little secret. WYSIWYG editors are more often what you see is what you sometimes get. And the main reason for the breakdown in what you see in your WYSIWYG and what you see in the live version often comes down to copying and pasting from, say, your Microsoft Word or your Google Doc. Because when you copy and paste and bring it over to your CMS or to your blog platform, you're bringing the formatting from Microsoft Word and Google Docs with you.
So Word and Docs are ideal for the create, edit, collaborate stages of the content lifecycle, as they allow for real-time collaboration, cloud editing, and are often the type of software that content creators are most used to working in. So that's great. I know that's what I use. However, they're obviously not publishing platforms, and content created there has to be transferred to your publishing platform. Many WYSIWYG editors do come with a feature that sometimes works. Sometimes works, that allows you to copy and paste from Word or strip the formatting so that there's no issues on the live pages, but they really are imperfect, as I found out yesterday. The best way to be sure that there's no cruft in your content is to have an understanding of basic HTML. So what do we mean by cruft? Cruft is badly designed, unnecessary, complicated, or unwanted code.
So before I proceed with some examples, just want to issue a warning from Dean Barker, author of the book we referenced earlier. Access to HTML source code should be carefully controlled for many reasons, and we are not advocating going into the back end of your website and digging around there. We're talking about working within the content module where you're posting content, just taking a look and inspecting that HTML to make sure it's nice and clean. You'll see here from my example. Here I have the 4 most valuable KPIs that content marketers should be focusing on. I have click-through rate, conversion rate, social sharing, bounce rate. When I want to publish this online, I want it to look exactly like that. I want a hyperlink with the 4 most valuable KPIs, and I want my 4 points to have bullet points. If I go and copy and paste this and drop it right into the rich text editor of my CMS, this is what that code is going to look like. And whether you know anything about HTML at all, you can tell that that is messy. There's a lot going on there, way too much going on there. So now if I actually access the HTML portion of my content module and put it in manually, this is what I have. I have an open P for my paragraph. I put in the text, put in my hyperlink, and then I have my unordered list here, which gives me my bullet points. So again, you can see in the first P, there's just all this extra information. And that is the formatting from Google Docs. Now, if you just leave this alone, it's very likely that when you go to publish live, it'll mess with the fonts on your website. Things will be a different size, buttons won't be in the right place, images might be all out of line. It just causes a lot of headaches. So it's just, the best practice is to clean up that code before you go live.
So here are the examples of the most important HTML for content marketers to be aware of. If you want to take your knowledge further than these examples, there are several excellent self-guided tutorials available on w3schools.com. So this is the ordered list. No, paragraphs, headings, paragraphs, heading, and then another paragraph. So this gives you really the information that you need.
And here's an example of our unordered list. So you see the UL, LI, close LI, that's your coffee, tea, and milk. And then when you go to publish that online, it looks like coffee, tea, and milk with bullet points.
Perfect. The following is an ordered list and will display online as a numbered list. So you can see the OL is ordered list, and then the LIs will actually translate into numbers, coffee, tea, and milk.
So again, we're not going too deep here on the HTML. We always recommend, if you have this ability to paste from Word and strip that font, strip that extra code out of there, use it. But it's always good to just do a double check before you go to publish live.
Do it. It will save you lots of time and clean up later headaches.
Publishing best practices. It's time to talk about email.
Email remains one of the most reliable publishing platforms for organizations looking to connect with their existing customer base and nurture newly acquired leads to become customers. According to Campaign Monitor, despite the explosion of new technologies, email is the channel generating the highest ROI for marketers. It makes a lot of sense.
Best practices for publishing an email are similar to those we've already discussed. It's important that you're working from a documented content strategy, content calendar, a single source of truth, and you have simple approval workflow to ensure publishing deadlines are met. Further, working knowledge of HTML is also helpful here to avoid cruft.
There has for some time raged a debate over which format is best suited for email, HTML or plain text. Obviously, a plain text email avoids the issue of cruft and is viewable in almost every email provider. However, a plain text email does not allow you to include images or buttons. HubSpot has performed a variety of tests on the deliverability and open rates of HTML emails versus plain text. And what they found is that though people say they prefer HTML emails, they are more likely to open and click through plain text emails, likely because they more closely resemble a personal email from a friend or a colleague. And fortunately, most email providers allow you to create and send both versions of the email. It's important to remember to update and optimize the plain text version of your email before you send, because that's also a mistake that's sometimes made. Ian, can you share some insight into how you found plain text emails to perform over HTML?
Well, I think it matches quite exactly what HubSpot found, is that people seem to tell you that they want images and they want that kind of nice newsletter looking email, but they're more responsive to the plain text emails. The plain text, like you said, it just looks like a personal email from a friend or from a colleague. The more images you add, and what we show you here, the more images you add, the less likely there's going to be click-through or conversion.
Interesting.
Evidence here shows that images can reduce click-through rates. Further, images and emails can detract from the mobile readability of your email. So if you're including an image, make sure that it's no wider than 600 pixels and there's very little text. And though the image might look good in your editor, it'll render much smaller on a mobile device. So if you're including a button in your email as a CTA, don't use an image for that button, because that's going to shrink and it's going to be too tiny, a thumb can't even press it. You should build your buttons with HTML so that it can respond to the screen size and device type. So in the handout section, we do have some CTA best practices. Feel free to access those. Unfortunately, beyond our scope today, but perhaps something we'll touch upon in a future session.
Awesome.
Let's touch briefly on when to send, one of the most important things to keep in mind when publishing an email. There's no clear-cut answer on when best to send would be. Ultimately, I think you have to get to know your audience. You have to test and you have to find out when they're more responsive. MailChimp has compiled some very helpful statistics We have a link to a blog post in one of our handouts, and here is some data from Constant Contact. You can see in the healthcare industry, best time to send is Tuesday at 12 p.m., financial services Monday at 11 a.m., higher education Saturday at 4 p.m., travel and tourism Monday at 8 a.m. Alex here actually couldn't believe that the Saturday at 4 p.m. was an actual send time. Sam, any thoughts on that?
I think some of these are funny to me, but you never know. You literally
Exactly.
never know.
Yep.
And it's interesting because we've tried a couple different things, and actually it varies from time of year as well.
Sure.
Not necessarily so much in the healthcare and financial services space, that they more vary in terms of time of day, depending on what that is, the open rates. Higher education, travel, and tourism, they have a seasonal business. Higher education, you've got students there, but in the summer, maybe not so much, so you get a higher open rate. Travel and tourism is very much a Monday through Friday or thing, because on Saturday and Sunday everybody is busy doing what they need to do to keep their organization or their businesses open. So it makes a lot of sense that it's Monday at 8 a.m. But really it comes down to what are you looking at for your data and making sure that you're listening to it when you're sending out your emails.
Now we're going to cover social posts. We will go into greater depth regarding social publishing. We've got 2 webinars in July, social media marketing webinars, how to choose the right platform on July 20th, and getting the most from paid social on July 27th. But I want to quickly discuss Facebook's Open Graph because it's related to some of the other publishing things we've been talking about earlier.
So the definition of an open graph, for those that aren't familiar with it, Open Graph Protocol enables any web page to become a rich object in a social graph. For example, this is used on Facebook to allow any web page to have the same functionality as any other object on Facebook. So it's a really powerful tool.
So don't overlook updating if you have in your CMS, if you have in your blog, the ability to add an image to Open Graph, add a description, add title there. Because Open Graph is to Facebook and LinkedIn what metadata and title tags are to search engines. The information that you input there is going to be what shows up on those social networks.
Mm-hmm.
So this brings us to that debate over automation versus native publishing. It comes down to Open Graph. If you've scheduled a post using an automation platform and the wrong image displays with the link or the description doesn't match, it could be because your automation platform is not working correctly with the Open Graph. Thoughts, Sam, here on this native versus automation debate?
Yeah, and I've talked about this a couple times before too, about automation versus native. So I love automation tools. We use them. We've used several of them here at SilverTech, and we still continue to do that. But they are limited, and the reason for that is because there are people who run the social networks themselves that also want people to be posting directly into their network versus using a third party, and so the integration tools are not necessarily where they should be to be able to have the same experience if you were publishing natively versus a third party tool. So what I would say is if you need to move quickly, if automation and efficiency is very important to you, then I would use a third-party tool all the time. There are certain instances, though, where you need to make sure that you're controlling how that post looks. And so for that, you might need to do a native post and use some type of a trackable link. I really love automation tools because they do allow you to tie that whole customer journey together, which is really what we're searching for as part of the lead to loyal methodology. That's really what you want to do. But sometimes it negates that. Sometimes looks are better. And so you just have to kind of look at it one-to-one. LinkedIn is one of the ones we normally have a problem with some of our different third-party tools because of how those hooks are connected. So just keep in mind what you need things to look like, so photos don't get cut off, and that you're putting out that best foot forward for your brand.
Mm-hmm. I can think of an example where you always want to be native publishing is if you were building an ad,
Yes.
building content, adding images to eventually boost a post. You want to have that full control. But more on social publishing in July and our 2 webinars there. Before we close up, I would like to touch on video if we could. A lot here. This would be something else that will warrant a further discussion down the road, but just want to touch on a few best practices. The native argument actually carries over to video, and we'll see why here. In a Q4 earnings call to investors, Facebook's CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, we all know him, said, "I see video as a mega trend." So he continued to say that they're pursuing smaller formed content. That's their focus. So they're indicating that Facebook wants to be more like YouTube than they want to be like Netflix, at least in the short term. I mean, there's good reason for that too. YouTube's the second largest search engine, an amazing 17% of all internet traffic flows through it. I think we're going to see video wars, and they're going to heat up, and the networks are each going to be vying for ad revenue. And that leaves us content marketers always having to scramble and figure out the best way to post. We may find that the channels will not play nice with each other. If you've ever uploaded a video to YouTube and attempted to share that link over to Facebook, you will find universally that your organic reach of that linked video is going to be lower than if you had uploaded that video directly to Facebook.
Exactly. So our recommendation is to post your short videos natively to the channel that you want to engage your audience with. If at all possible, incorporate live video into your content strategy, as we just did. For those who are following us on Facebook, you saw that we went live right before this webinar. While this feature remains new, Facebook will notify you and all of your fans that you're going live.
The landscape versus portrait debate.
Huh.
This pains me a little, Sam.
Okay.
We've seen, though, how video has changed. I'm more a traditional videographer myself. I need my 16:9 ratio. It makes more sense to record in portrait mode. Can you explain?
I can explain, and I know there's a lot of diehard videographers who will really hurt over this, and I'm sorry. So essentially what's happening is if people are watching their videos in portrait mode now versus landscape, and that's simply because the rest of their news feed is portrait. So in Instagram and in Facebook, they're not going to turn their phone to watch a video. They're just going to watch it the way that it is in portrait mode. So there is some rumbling and some pretty strong recommendations that you actually start shooting your videos with that in mind, and so actually kind of leaving behind the landscape mode. But it's all in what is that final output for your video, what is that final publishing piece, and so that's what I would do for a recommendation here.
All makes sense.
Yes.
Quickly, before we head out, I would like to share some best practices for uploading to YouTube. It is the most flexible platform for video still. You upload here and you can embed elsewhere throughout your site, throughout your blog. Here's last week's webinar, How to Write Great Content. I uploaded the on-demand presentation, and here I'm showing you that always be sure to add a custom thumbnail that's going to show up before a user plays your video. Here you want to make sure that you write a description for your video and add as many tags that are relevant to your video as possible. There's a lot of research out there that those most successful YouTube broadcasters are those that use the most tags. And here, this is also in the upload portion of your YouTube. You can go to some of the advanced features and you want to link to an improved website. You want to associate your website with your YouTube channel to make sure that at the end of that video you have control over where the viewer is going to go. Here I'm able to control and send them back to silvertech.com or send them back to another landing page with relevant content. Critical thing to do. You can also here add your transcripts to your video. Transcripts are ideal for SEO, but another topic we've covered extensively here at SilverTech is ADA website compliance. And if you're putting video on your websites, you will need to have transcripts on there with them so that your site is ADA compliant. In review, we covered a lot of ground today. Hopefully you'll find the on-demand presentation valuable. To recap, here are the essential steps to publishing actionable content. You want to document your content strategy and gain company-wide buy-in. You want to use a calendar. Format is not as important as the one you use being a single source of truth. You want to set up a simple approval workflow to ensure publication deadlines are met. And you want to publish blog posts often and update your website on a regular basis.
A few more things. If you're responsible for publishing, learn basic HTML and avoid cruft. Always send a plain text email with your HTML email. Control the look and feel of your social posts with Open Graph, and post natively when control is an issue.
As I've mentioned before, next up is our social media marketing webinars. First one is how to choose the right platform. You will all have links to register for this one. If you haven't already, it will be sent out. And that does conclude our presentation for today.
Thank you.